How many of you have ever read the Charles Dickens classic, A Tale of Two Cities? Show of hands. How many? All right. And how many of you who raised your hand, you were forced to read it in some kind of high school class? Ah, yes. All right. Truth be told. And whether you know that book or you've watched a movie based on it, the opening line is perhaps one of the most famous in all of literature. Charles Dickens begins, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." Yeah, so even if you didn't read that, you probably heard that line before. And for those of you that read the book, and those of you especially who were forced to read the book, maybe that describes your relationship with the book as well. If you enjoyed it, it was the best of times. If you struggled and perhaps failed a test or a project along the way, it was the worst of times. But we use this today because that's what the book of Acts is like, isn't it? It's the best of times for the early church, but it is also the worst of times, isn't it? The church is growing. By this point in Acts 12, they have thousands and thousands of members, as we mentioned at the beginning. Now the Gentiles are becoming a part of it. The apostles are preaching and teaching, performing miraculous signs. The church is growing. It's the best of times, but at the same time, it's also the worst of times because people are being persecuted. Just a few Sundays ago, we talked about Paul. Remember Saul, who was going out, that young, zealous Pharisee. And what was he doing? He was taking followers of Jesus and throwing them in jail. He was there approving the death of Stephen. And we see this persecution now is becoming widespread. The Jewish leaders are there persecuting these Christians. And so it was also the worst of times, wasn't it? And here we see Peter being put in jail. Well, friends, today we're going to do something a little different for our sermon. We're going to go to school today. Some of you know, when I first started my career, I was a high school English teacher. I actually never taught Tale of Two Cities, but I know that quote. But today, we're going to do a little bit of a lesson. So right now, I want you to turn to the person next to you and say, "Hey, neighbor, school has started. It's time to learn from God's Word." And in learning today, what we're going to do is we're going to look at Acts 12, but we're going to look at the characters. All right, just like any good story, Acts 12 has a list of characters. And we're going to look at the main characters, and we're going to see what we can learn from these characters. So whether you've read Acts 12 many times or today was the first time you've heard it, we're going to go through this. All right, so we're going to start with verse 1. In verse 1, we meet our first character. Who do we meet in verse 1? King Herod. Now, this is King Herod Agrippa the First. All right, now he is the grandson of another King Herod that you've heard about, Herod the Great, all right, which was a self-titled name. I wouldn't recommend you add the Great onto your name anytime soon. He was not very great when it came to how he treated the people, but if you remember, King Herod the Great, we know him way back at the beginning of Jesus' life. What did he want to do to young Jesus? Kill him, right? He's that bad king. He's the one, if you've ever done a Christmas pageant, no child wants to be King Herod, right? Because even the 4-year-old knows he's the bad guy, right? If we were talking about characters in literature, you would say he's the antagonist. All right, don't worry, there's not going to be a test. All right, but he's the one who's out there persecuting. And who is he persecuting? The leaders of the early church, the Jesus followers, right? And he is noticing something. You see, he arrests one of the disciples. Go to verse 2. Now, we're not going to talk too much about this person. We're going to stay with King Herod. But who does he arrest and have put to death? James. James was one of the disciples. James is the brother of John, right? One of the original 12 disciples. King Herod arrests him and has him killed. It says put to death with the sword. Usually that means he was beheaded. He has James killed. And when James is killed, how do the Jews respond? They say yes, or do they say, oh, bad King Herod? No, they say yes. The non-Jewish Christians are very excited about this, especially the Jewish leaders, the temple people, because they say this is what we need to do. We need to get rid of these Jesus followers. Take out the leaders. And so in verse 3, we see, when he saw this met with approval among the Jews, he proceeded to seize who? Peter also. All right, now we go to our next character. So we got King Herod. Remember him. Just log that in. You might want to make a note. Bad guy. All right, Peter. We talked a lot about Peter last week. Peter, at this point, is the unofficial leader of the early church. So Peter being arrested, would this be a challenge for the early church? Yes, right? Take the leader. That's a big problem. And so Herod arrests Peter, and when does he arrest him? During the festival of unleavened bread. Now, if you don't know your Jewish holidays and festivals very well, that's okay. Again, there won't be a test. All right, but the festival of unleavened bread is the festival holiday that immediately follows Passover. Well, what is Passover? Passover, remember way back in the Old Testament book of Exodus, remember that guy Moses? Looked a lot like Charlton Heston, right? Moses goes into Egypt. God sends Moses, and he goes to the Pharaoh and he says, "Let my people go." And Pharaoh says no, and God sends plague after plague after plague, and eventually says, "Get out of here." And after being slaves in Egypt for 400 years, the Israelites, the Hebrews, they leave Egypt. There's a parting of the Red Sea, and then Pharaoh's army goes splish splash as the sea closes on them as they're trying to pursue the Hebrews. Now, what is Passover celebrating? Freedom, right? Isn't it ironic that as the Jews are celebrating freedom, what has just happened to Peter? He's put in prison, which is the opposite of freedom, isn't it? And they're saying, yeah, we've got our freedom, and we're even more excited to see Peter lose his. So, Peter is now in prison. And the reason he's in prison is Herod is thinking to himself, King Herod Agrippa I, is thinking to himself, it works so well with James. Wait until I put Peter on trial and have Peter executed. Just think of the approval of the people. And that's his plan. He's planning, as soon as this festival is over, to have a trial, which we know this isn't going to be some fair trial, and then have Peter executed. And most likely, he's going to keep doing this to the rest of the disciples and other Jewish Christian leaders and followers. And so we've got Peter now, and he's in jail. And notice, if you go to verse 4, after arresting him, he, King Herod, put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Most likely, Herod has heard that Peter had been in jail before and got out. Remember, if you're keeping track, this is the 3rd time in the book of Acts that Peter has been put in jail. Okay, the first time, they let him go. The second time, he's with all the disciples, and they are freed by God. And this is the 3rd time. Herod's heard the stories, and he says, that's not happening in my prison. So how many soldiers? 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. I'm not great at math, but 4 times 4 is 16. 16 soldiers for how many people? One Peter. One guy. And in fact, King Herod is not taking any chances, because we're going to learn later on that he has 2 soldiers chain themselves to Peter, which must have made bathroom trips really awkward. But he's not taking any chances. So we've got Peter surrounded by these soldiers in prison, basically on death row. All right, now let's keep going. Remember, we're looking at our characters. Verse 5, so Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. You might want to make a note there, church was praying for him. But now let's go to verse 6. The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, so this is the night, which basically precedes the day when Peter will be executed. Peter was sleeping between two soldiers bound with two chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. All right, just picture that. The next day is going to be Peter's death sentence. Two soldiers chained to him, other soldiers outside the door, locked in this dank little prison cell. Probably the innermost cell of the prison, because that would be the most secure spot, hardest to break out. And then in verse 7, we meet our next character. All right, and who do we meet in verse 7? Who shows up in the prison while Peter is sleeping, chained to some guards? An angel. Now, we don't know this angel's name. If you look at verse 7, does it name the angel? Does it say Gabriel, Michael? No. It could have been one of those. I actually think it was Herald. You don't know Herald? He was there the night Jesus was born. He was singing, "Hark the herald angel sings." Let it sink in. All right. This angel, we'll call him Herald, he shows up. And what happens when the angel shows up? Do the guards notice him? No. But he fills this dark prison with light. And he nudges Peter awake and he says, "Quick, get up." And as that angel nudges him, those chains on Peter's wrists just fall off. And again, the guards seem to not notice. Then they leave. He has Peter get dressed, put on your sandals, put on your cloak, and let's go. It is so amazing, so surreal, that Peter isn't even sure it's happening. He thinks it's what in verse 9? A vision. He thinks this is God giving him another vision. But no, this is real. This is happening. And then the angel takes Peter past all those guards, through those doors, and they leave. Just like that. They're out of the prison. And they go to enter the city. And there in front of them, there's a gate. All right, if you look back there, let's pull up the verse. They saw this gate, this iron gate in verse 10. They passed the first and second guards and came to the iron gate leading to the city. Now, I want to point out this gate to you, because this is a historical record right here. You may not realize it, but this is one of the earliest recorded accounts that we have of an automatic gate. Because what happens? This big iron gate, Peter and the angel show up, and what does it do? It says it opened by itself. I promise you, it was not electrified. Right? This wasn't like going to King Soopers and the doors opened. God is at work. And so they go out the gate, and Peter is free. And the angel's gone. And it's only then that Peter realizes this hadn't been a vision. This just happened. Now, we've got some more characters to meet. So let's continue on. Let's go to our next verse, verse number 12. Because Luke, the writer of Acts, he's going to shift now. He's going to shift our story. All right, everybody tracking so far? All right, we've got King Herod, we've got Peter, we've got the angel, Herald. Now, we're moving to a different setting. We're moving in the city to a home. And at this home are a bunch of Jesus followers, believers. And we already saw earlier, way back in the beginning of chapter 12, that what are these believers doing while they're in this home? What are they doing? They're praying. They are praying. And they've been praying probably ever since James was arrested. But they are especially praying for Peter. And they're in there praying. Now, Luke lets us know something I think is rather interesting. He lets us know whose home this is. The name of the woman who owns the home is what? Mary. That's a good Bible name, right? Mary. Mary, this isn't the mother of Jesus. She's the mother of a guy named John, also called what? Mark. Maybe you've heard of him, John Mark. We'll hear of him later in the book of Acts because his cousin is a man named Barnabas. Maybe you remember that name. Barnabas was a co-missionary, good friend of the Apostle Paul. And later, John Mark, or we can just call him Mark, will join Barnabas and Paul on a missionary journey. He won't last real long, but later he and Barnabas will go out and do some more missions, just the two of them. We believe, most biblical scholars believe, this John Mark, this son of Mary, where these believers are together, this is also the writer of one of the Gospels. Which gospel do you think it could be? Mark. Woo! The Bible is not rocket science. Yes. Isn't that interesting that Luke gives us this little detail, just to let us know? And so they're there praying. Now, we're not going to focus on Mary or John Mark, but we're going to focus on the next character who shows up in verse 13. Peter knocked at the outer entrance, and a servant named Rhoda came to answer the door. Rhoda is our next character. Now, who was Rhoda? Well, most likely, Rhoda is not a Jew. It's very likely she's a foreigner. She's a servant. So, in terms of importance in Jewish society, where do you think a foreign servant would rank? Up at the top or down at the bottom? The bottom. Way down there at the bottom. In fact, it's also very likely she was a very young servant. Some believe maybe even between 10 to 12 years old. So she's young. She's a female, which in the ancient world, sorry ladies, women did not have as much importance. She's a foreigner, and she's probably not a Jew. And she's there in this house, and she's the one who hears the knock at the door. That's probably her job, is to answer the door. And she hears this knock, right? Knock, knock, knock. And she probably does what any of us would do, especially if there's a little bit of danger in the air to be a follower of Jesus. Or we could say there was a lot of danger. She probably didn't just open the door, did she? She probably said, "Who is it?" Right? And who is at the door? Who's that knocking? Peter. Now, if we go to the next verse, verse 14. When she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed, she ran back without opening it and exclaimed, "Peter is at the door." Now just imagine, this 12-year-old foreign servant girl, right? Peter is knocking at the door. They've been praying for Peter for probably days, and she hears the knock. She says, "Who is it?" He says, "It's me." She goes, "That's Peter." But then she forgets to open the door, right? And she runs into probably the next room where all these believers, these prayer warriors, these heroes of the early church, these heroes of our Christian faith, they're all gathered. And she comes rushing in. She says, "You're not going to believe it. Peter's at the door." And I locked him out. Peter's at the door. And how do these heroes of faith, how do these prayer warriors answer? Look at their answer. What does it say? What does it say in verse 15? They say, "You're out of your mind." You know, that would be confusing, right? They know that Peter's on death row. They know he's in prison. And now this servant girl is saying he's at the door. They're thinking, no way, right? You don't understand. He's in jail. He's about to die. He's not at the door. But then I love their next part of reasoning as Rhoda insists. What do they say then? Well, it must be a what? An angel. It must be his angel. Which, just think about that for a second. They're okay with leaving his angel locked out. You know what? As a flawed follower of Jesus, these couple verses give me a lot of hope. Because when I have my doubt and confusion, I know I'm not alone. The early church locked Peter out because they didn't believe it was him. And their reasoning was they thought maybe it was just his angel. I actually read that one commentator put, it was easier for Peter to break out of prison than to get into a prayer meeting. Thankfully, Rhoda refuses to just leave Peter out there. And Peter, to give him credit, keeps on knocking. And eventually, they open the door. And you can kind of imagine that, right? The whole group probably goes to that door feeling rather scared, right? They kind of peer out and, "Peter!" And it says they were astonished. They were astonished to see him. All right, so that's where we're going to stop our story. All right, we've met quite a few characters there, haven't we? So let's review. Let's review our main characters. All right, we've got our antagonist, the villain, who's that? King Herod. All right, King Herod. Then we've got Peter. And then we've got the angel. We're calling him Harold. You'll not forget that dad joke anytime soon. And we have our young girl, Rhoda. All right, those are our characters. So now we go to what we call the practical application. What can we learn from these characters? So let's start with King Herod. Well, what do we learn from King Herod? Well, let's fast forward and let me give you the Cliff Notes version of King Herod Agrippa I. After Peter breaks out of jail, if you read the rest of Acts chapter 12, which I highly recommend, you'll notice that Herod has all those soldiers, those 16 soldiers, he has them all executed. Herod's quick to just kill people off that he's upset with. But that's not the end of King Herod Agrippa I. No, a little bit later, God sends an angel in one of Herod's very prideful moments where he basically says that he is a god and lets people think of him as a god. God sends an angel that strikes down Herod, and he is eaten by worms. Ooh, that is not a good way to end. That's King Herod. So what do we learn from him? Don't get eaten by worms. All right. No, what do we learn from him? Can you control and stop God? Yes or no? No. King Herod Agrippa I tried to stop God. He tried to control the church by killing its leaders. Can you stop God? No. King Herod learned that God is at work. You can't stop him. So what do we learn from King Herod? God is at work. All right, now we go to Peter. We can learn a lot from Peter throughout his life. But in this particular moment, I want to focus on one verse about Peter. Go back to verse 6. I don't know if you recognize this, but in verse 6, think about this for a moment. Peter is locked up in this dark, stinky little prison room, chained to 2 guards, with more guards outside. Most likely, the next day, he knows he's going to be beheaded or killed, just like James. Peter, who's experienced all this grief in the loss of his good friend, his brother in Christ, James, who's in this prison cell, what is he doing in verse 6? What's he doing? He's sleeping. Do you think that's a little strange? With all that's going on, with how uncomfortable that must be to have guards chained to you, Peter is sound asleep. He's snoring away. And you think, how is he able to do that? Is it because he's just so tired? No. Is it because he's so experienced now being in jail that nothing seems to bother him? No. I firmly believe that Peter is able to be so fast asleep. In fact, he's sleeping so soundly, the angel has to literally smack him. He is able to do that because Peter has a peace. He has a peace because Peter knows an important truth, that God is in control. Peter knows that God is at work. God is at work. All right, let's go back to our characters. Then we have the angel. Now, we can't be angels. I know, some of you said, but I'm so close. No, they are God's heavenly messengers. But what we see with this angel is anything impossible for God? No, nothing is impossible. Peter is in an impossible situation. A situation that strategically, logically, we look and say, there's no way out. But this angel shows up because God does the impossible. God is at work, and he will do and continue to do the impossible. And we see this angel help accomplish that. Now, finally, we go to our last character, Rhoda, the young servant girl. Well, what do we learn from her? I think what we learn from Rhoda is that child faith that Jesus talked about. Rhoda was there praying with all the other believers. And when that knock came and she heard Peter's voice, she said, "Yep, God answered prayer. It's Peter." Nobody else believed it, but she did. She prayed, and God answered the prayer. That's the kind of faith that Jesus talks about in a childlike faith. We believe God in what he says. We see what God does, and we say, "Yep, that's our God. He does what he says." She prayed, and God answered the prayer. That's how it worked. Nobody else would believe her, but she refused to be quiet. We can also learn from Rhoda maybe the important lesson. When God comes knocking at the door, open it. So those are our characters. So my final question for you is, who are you in the story? Who are you like in that story? You say, "Well, Dave, I'm not King Herod." Right? I'm not the bad guy. No, you're not. But are there some Herod qualities in you? Do you ever find that you're trying to fight against God? Trying to prevent him from working in your life? Saying, "Well, God, I know you've got plans and a purpose for me, but man, I've got a really good agenda over here. So if you could just get on my page." Or maybe it's more like you know that God wants to use you and he wants to help you and heal you. But at the same time, you're saying, but I should just do it myself. I've got to clean up my act a little more, God, before I can get close to you. Do you have that King Herod in you? There's a little bit of you that's fighting against God. Or maybe it's Peter. Maybe we look at that and you say, "I wish I could be more like Peter. I wish I could have that kind of peace when I'm trapped and surrounded by the enemy." Maybe you feel like Peter because you feel like you're in a prison right now. Maybe you feel like you're locked up. You're locked up with worry. You're locked up with uncertainty. You're locked up with fear. And you wish you could have that peace that Peter did, to know that God is at work. Or maybe it's the angel. You think, "I need God to help me in an impossible situation right now. I need him to send some help." Maybe you've been throwing up an SOS to God for a while. Maybe it's not even for you, but it's for a family member. It's for a friend. It's for someone that you know that you see struggle so greatly. Maybe it's a health issue, a financial issue, a relational issue, a spiritual issue, and you're saying, "God, I need you to do the impossible." Do you need that angel? Do you need that help? Or maybe it's Rhoda. Maybe you feel a little bit like this young foreign servant, that maybe you feel kind of insignificant. Maybe you feel like no one even is listening to you, and when you say something, that's the response. People are saying, "Well, you're out of your mind." Who are you in that story? Maybe you're a mixture of all those characters. Who are you in that story? We go back to that quote that we began with, that famous Charles Dickens quote. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And indeed, when we look at Acts 12, we can definitely see the best, but we can also see the worst, can't we? Well, that was Acts 12. What about today? What about October of 2022? Is this the best of times and the worst of times? I think it'd be a little easier to argue the second part, wouldn't it? To say this is the worst of times, right? Take a look, Dave. Our world is not a pleasant place sometimes. There's a lot of conflict. There's a lot of division. In fact, Beth's parents were just visiting this past week, and I was talking to my father-in-law, and I said, basically, right now, it seems that the understanding is I am open to any opinions as long as they're the same as mine. We see a lot of division. Just watch the news. Do a little scrolling for 5 minutes. You'll see a lot of division. We see a lot of conflict. We see a lot of violence. We see a lot of natural disasters. We see a lot of problems in the world. Is it the worst of times? We could say, oh, look at all that. Here's an example, here's an example, here's an example. It's all over. Now, I could argue with you that the world has always been a violent and conflict-ridden place. It's just now we have the news of everything that happens. But I can see your point. If you said this is the worst of times, and I'm ready for Jesus to come back any day. But what about the first part? Would you argue it's the best of times? Would you say that this is the best of times right now, October 2022? This is the best of times? You know, I just had a demographic study done for this area. Our district, Converge Rocky Mountain, has the ability that we can give them an address and you can tell them a radius. So I said, give me 10 miles right from here, right this spot, 10-mile circle, and let us know. What's it like? What are people like? What's the situation? And you know what we found? That in that 10-mile radius, 60% of the people from here, 10 miles all around, 60%, which is thousands of people, 60% of them do not attend any church or religious organization. 60%. That is literally tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. All right, just let that sink in. 60% of the people living all around this church, many living all around you, do not go to any church, any religious organization. Zero. They're what we call the nuns. Perhaps they're de-churched, unchurched, whatever label you want to give. They don't go to a church. And we could see that and say 60%? That means we're the minority. That means we are literally surrounded by people who aren't going to church like we are doing right now. We can look and say, that's the worst of times. Or we could say, that's the best of times. Because do you know what that means, friends? That anywhere we walk, any direction, north, south, east, west, anywhere in this 10-mile radius, there are thousands of people who don't know about Jesus. Thousands of people who might have some preconceived misconceptions about what a Jesus follower is all about. Do you know what that means? That means we've got a mission field right here. And it's huge. It is absolutely huge. That means we have an opportunity to share the good news of Jesus Christ, to share that a Savior has come for all people, a Savior who died on the cross for you and for all of them in this 10-mile radius, a Savior who loves them. We have that opportunity to share it. Yeah, you could say, I don't like being so surrounded. I wish more people would be in church, which more people would know Jesus. And you know what? God says, me too. Me too. So let's get going. Go out and share. Yeah. It seems intimidating, but at the same time, that's kind of exciting. It's exciting. There are people literally next door to us who probably don't know Adam from Abraham, who don't know anything about this incredible Word of God. We have that opportunity. And it probably wouldn't take you too much work if you sat down and started thinking or listing on paper everyone you knew in your circles of life, whether that's work, friends, family, clubs, whatever you're a part of, school. Are there people that you know who are part of that 60%? Yeah. And maybe some of them would even say they believed in God, but they're not going to church anywhere because there was probably something that happened. I once heard a quote that said the only person that ever gets between someone and Jesus is some other Jesus follower. Maybe someone who had a conflict in a religious organization. Or maybe someone who had a bad experience with someone who said they were a follower of Jesus. But do you know these people? Yes, of course you do. Of course I do. And so we have that opportunity to share the good news, to let them know that we have a God who loves us and sent his son Jesus for us. It is also the best of times, because the mission field, I would argue, probably has never been greater. There's never been more opportunity to share about Jesus with other people. And now the big question, why in the world do we have all this up here today? When I first moved to Colorado in August of 2014, I came to an understanding that there are two seasons here. There's winter, and then there's orange cone season. I have never lived in a place, and I've lived in quite a few places and states and another country, a couple countries, where there is such a prevalence of orange cones all the time. In fact, have you ever had the experience where you're driving and there's literally miles of orange cones cutting off a lane, and you get to the end, and what do you find? A truck full of orange cones. Have you had that? There's no construction. There's just orange cones. It's kind of like orange cone mania. It's everywhere. Right? Well, what do these orange cones mean? At least what are they supposed to mean when we see them? That something is being built, right? There's construction, right? On the roads, hopefully they're fixing something. Those 25 guys and the one guy with the shovel, right? They're fixing something. But when you see cones, it means caution, be careful. And we have to be careful because there's construction happening, right? There's big rigs, things being built, roads being paved. We see those and we think something's at work. Well, today, I want you to think of the orange cone in a different way. I don't want you to think of it just as a nuisance that you're going to have to merge over really quick. I want you to think of work. Of work. Because if you were paying attention, hopefully you were, you noticed all those characters in Acts 12. There was always something common that we can learn from all of them, whether it's King Herod or the servant Rhoda, that each of them represented that God was at work. Friends, here's the good news. If you've tuned out everything else, I want you to tune in right now. God is at work in you. God is at work in you. He began that work, and he continues that work. He sent his son Jesus to die for you because God is at work in you. He loves you. He is with you. You are his greatest work, and he is working in your life. So today, Jacob and Noah are going to bring by the offering plates. And you don't need to put anything in. They're going to give you something. Maybe Jacob, you can go to this side. In there are some cones, some miniature cones, because I thought these would be way too big for you to take home and put somewhere. Plus, I know a few of you would probably get together after church, and if I gave you these, would pull them together and block off the parking lot or something. So instead, I want to give you these little miniature cones. I know they're not the typical orange cones. I couldn't get those quick enough. So you got the red ones with the stripes. But I want you to take that cone, and I want you to put it somewhere. Put it somewhere, maybe on a nightstand, maybe on a desk, maybe on a kitchen shelf, somewhere where you can see it. Somewhere where it reminds you each and every day that God is at work. He's at work in your life. He's at work in our community. He's at work here at the church. And so for the next few weeks here at the church, I'm going to leave an orange cone up here. So when you come in, we'll be reminded God is at work. Oh no. God's not done. Acts 12 wasn't a one and done. God is at work. And maybe there's a morning or an evening where you're just having a terrible day. Maybe you've had terrible news. Maybe you're just struggling, you're hurting, you're just worried. I want you to look at that cone and remember, God is at work in me. God is at work in you. God loves you. He is with you. So I want you to turn to that person you talked to at the beginning of the service. Say, hey, neighbor, God is at work. And He is at work in you. Amen.